Raymond Cole was 44 years old, a licensed general contractor who had spent 16 years building things other people described in the past tense when they talked about their best work. Raymond didn't have a past tense. He had the Callaway Street renovation that the city still used in its redevelopment presentations. He had the Meridian Plaza foundation repair that 3 other contractors had walked away from before anyone called him. He had 14 employees whose names he knew, whose families he had met at the company cookout he held every August in the parking lot of the warehouse, and who showed up 11 minutes before the job started, because that was when Raymond showed up, and Raymond's crew ran the way Raymond ran. He drove a white F-250 with Og on the door that his wife had once described, at a dinner party, as charmingly unpretentious. He wore the same pair of Timberland PROs he'd broken in on the Meridian job because they still had 2 years of work left in them, and he didn't discard things that still had work in them. He kept a red carpenter's pencil behind his ear, not for show, not for nostalgia, because he was never more than a conversation away from a surface he could mark. He was on a site or at his desk by 6:30 every morning. He left when the work was done. He was not a man who required visibility to know his own value. That had been, for most of their 8 years, the specific source of tension in his marriage to Vanessa Doyle Cole. She had required visibility. She had required his to reflect on hers. He had understood this about her, and had accommodated it with the patient attention he brought to structural problems, carefully, without complaint, until the problem exceeded the repair budget. He had no idea, when he walked into the signing room on a Thursday morning in March, that the one document in the room that couldn't be changed required something Vanessa had spent 8 months telling the professional community he didn't have. She found out what it required at the same moment everyone else in the room did. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The conference room smelled like fresh coffee and the particular dry air quality of a building whose vac had been running since before anyone arrived. 8th floor. South-facing windows, February light going gray before it came through the glass. Raymond had noticed, on the way in, that the curtain wall framing on the west side of the building had a thermal gap at the 3rd floor junction. He had filed it away the way he filed everything structural. Not because it was his problem, but because noticing was involuntary. He had arrived 24 minutes early. He had taken the chair against the east wall rather than the table, because the table was not where he was going to be when the room filled. He had a cup of coffee from the cart in the lobby and a red carpenter's pencil behind his ear, and the particular stillness of a man who has been somewhere long enough to understand the room before the room starts performing. Ruth Owens arrived at 9:41. She was the legal counsel for Meridian Development Group, the regional development firm Raymond had been quietly, correctly, permanently partnered with for 3 years. And she had a leather portfolio that she set on the table before she sat, which was her habit, because the portfolio contained everything that needed to be in reach, and she never began a meeting by looking for something. She was 60 years old, small and precise, with silver-streaked locks pinned back and reading glasses she wore on a chain that she put on immediately upon sitting, the way a surgeon preps before the room fills. She looked at Raymond across the table. "She'll be here by 10, Ruth said. "I know," Raymond said. Ruth looked at him for a moment. She had been managing his equity documentation since the beginning, since the night 3 years ago, when Raymond had driven to her office at 9:15 p.m. to review the partnership instruments before a deadline, and she had made coffee, and they had worked through the language until midnight. And she had looked at the final draft and said, "Your name is on every line that matters," he had said. "That's the only kind of line I sign." That had been the foundation of a professional relationship built on the shared understanding that documents meant what they said if you wrote them correctly. How do you want to handle it? She said. Raymond picked up his coffee. He set it down. Same as any other signing, he said. We let the contract run. Ruth looked at him once more. Something in her expression was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. The expression of a woman who had spent 30 years watching rooms go the way rooms go when the documentation is correct. She opened the portfolio. 8 months before the Thursday morning, Vanessa Cole had begun the campaign the way she began most things she committed to, with research, with deliberation, and with the specific social intelligence she had spent her career cultivating in the project management world. She had left Raymond in July. Not dramatically, she had left in the methodical way of someone who had already relocated her professional identity before she relocated her physical one. The email signature that no longer included his firm's name in the courtesy line. The industry luncheons where she had, over 6 careful months, reframed the story of their marriage as the story of a woman who had outgrown a partnership that wasn't keeping pace. She had not been vicious about it. She had been strategic, which was, Raymond had come to understand, the more durable form of harm. The specific shape of the campaign, Mutual Contacts received the version of Raymond Cole that Vanessa had composed. Difficult to work with. Talented, but limited. Good for the mid-size residential work. Not quite ready for the level they were operating at now. She said it the way she said everything professionally unpleasant, with regret, with a slight sadness, as if she were correcting a misapprehension about someone she had tried to believe in. 3 project managers Raymond knew had gently reduced their contact with him in the following months. A general contractor he had collaborated with twice passed on a referral that would have come to Raymond naturally 2 years earlier. He had noticed these things. He had filed them without connecting them, because he had been occupied with the Meridian Project, and because the Meridian Project was the most significant work of his professional life, and because he was a man who finished what he started before he addressed what was trying to distract him. He had not known, specifically, that Vanessa had been retained as project manager for the Alderton Group's commercial development, the contract that was sitting on the 8th floor conference table on the Thursday morning in February. He had not known until Ruth had called him 2 weeks before the signing and said, in the voice she used for information that required a moment before it required a response, "The Alderton signing is Thursday. You need to be in that room." He had said, "I know about the signing." She had said, "Does she know about you?" He had been quiet for a moment. "I'll take that as a no," Ruth said. "Thursday, 9:30. Don't be on time." He had been 24 minutes early. Vanessa arrived at 10:03 with the Alderton Group's principal, a man named Charles Alderton, and 2 associates from her project management firm. She came through the conference room door with the forward momentum of someone who had prepared for this room, had imagined it, had dressed for it, had rehearsed the version of herself she intended to present in it. She stopped when she saw Raymond against the east wall. The stop lasted less than 2 seconds. Then, her professional composure reassembled, visibly, the way scaffolding goes up, piece by piece, until the structure behind it is hidden. And she crossed toward the table and set down her folder and began introducing herself to Charles Alderton's associates with the warmth of a woman entirely in command of her environment. She did not speak to Raymond. She arranged herself at the opposite end of the table and opened her copy of the contract documents with the focused attention of someone who had decided that Raymond Cole's presence was a fact she had already accounted for and had no particular significance. He watched her. He said nothing. He finished his coffee and set the cup on the windowsill behind him with the same deliberate placement he gave every object he set down. The room filled. Charles Alderton sat at the center of the table. Ruth took the chair beside Raymond. The Alderton attorneys occupied the far end. Vanessa's 2 associates sat near her. and the one nearest Raymond, a younger man named Davis, who had been on 2 projects Raymond had run, and who gave Raymond a brief, slightly uncertain nod, sat with the expression of someone who was calculating what it meant that these 2 people were in the same room. Charles Alderton opened the meeting with a summary of the project, a 4-building mixed-use development on the East Corridor, 14 months of construction, a project budget he stated in a figure that landed in the room with appropriate weight. He thanked both parties for their work in bringing the contract to this stage. Vanessa spoke next. She gave a 2-minute overview of her firm's project management scope. She was good at this. Her delivery was clean. Her command of the material was real. And Raymond understood, watching her, that the professional reputation she had built was not invented. She was capable. She had also spent 8 months composing a version of him that was designed to make her capable look larger by comparison. When she finished, she looked at Charles Alderton and said, in the tone of a woman tying off a loose end, "I do want to note, for the room, that Raymond Cole's presence here is a surprise to me. I want to make sure everyone understands the context of our personal history, given that his prior firm has had some quality control issues on recent projects." She paused. She did not look at Raymond. "I just want the Alderton Group to have the full picture before we proceed." The room was quiet for a moment. Raymond did not move. He did not respond. He held his stillness the way he held the stillness on a job site when a subcontractor said something inaccurate in front of a client. Not because he was absorbing it, but because the correct time to address incorrect information was when the full picture was in front of everyone. He had learned this at 30. He had not needed to relearn it. Charles Alderton looked at Vanessa, then he looked at Raymond. Then he looked at Ruth. Ruth said, in the even voice she used when she was about to let the documentation perform, "We should open the contract. There are some signature requirements I'd like to walk through." Vanessa's expression shifted slightly. She looked at the contract in front of her. "The signature requirements are standard," she said. "Both parties sign. The Alderton principals countersign. There's one additional requirement," Ruth said. She was already turning to the page. She placed her copy flat on the table, facing the room. The way she placed every document she intended everyone to read simultaneously. Under the partnership instruments for the Meridian Development Group, all contracts of this scale require the signature of the equity partners. She indicated the line on the page. In this case, that's 2 signatures required. Mine as legal counsel and the equity partner of record. She said the name. She said it in the same voice she used for everything. No performance. No announcement. The name of the equity partner as it appeared in the recorded instruments. The instruments that had been filed with the county, registered with the state, prepared over 3 years of Thursday evening working sessions that had begun at 9:15 p.m. and ended at midnight, and produced documents that said exactly what they meant. Raymond Cole, equity partner. Meridian Development Group. The room absorbed it. Vanessa had been looking at the contract when Ruth read the line. Raymond watched her read it. He watched the way her eyes found his name in the field, and then moved back and found it again. The way eyes move when they are trying to reconcile what they are seeing with the architecture they had constructed around it. He had spent 16 years watching load-bearing structures take weight. He understood what it looked like when the weight exceeded the assumption. She went still. Not the stillness of composure. The stillness of a structure at the moment before the adjustment, when the load has landed and the material is determining whether it will hold or yield. Her expression moved through 3 things in the space of 4 seconds, and the third thing was not any of the things she had prepared for this room. She stood. The movement was abrupt. The movement of someone whose body acted before their professional register could manage it. She turned toward Raymond. She said something. He would not repeat it. Not in any room, not to anyone who asked. And then her hand moved. The sound of the slap was loud in the way that unexpected sounds in quiet rooms are loud, not because of volume, but because of contrast. The room had been library still. Then it was not. Raymond did not move. He did not raise his hands. He did not stand. He sat in the chair against the east wall and looked at Vanessa with the specific expression he brought to structural failures. Not anger, not shock, but the steady, documented attention of a man who needed to understand precisely what had just occurred so that the record could reflect it accurately. Davis, the young associate, had stood without deciding to. Charles Alderton's hand was flat on the table. Ruth had not moved at all. She was watching Vanessa with the expression of a woman who had been in enough rooms to have seen this kind of thing before and to know exactly what happened next. What happened next was the room. The room decided, in the silence that followed, the way rooms decide things when a single act makes the social arithmetic visible. Charles Alderton looked at Vanessa for a long moment. Then he looked at Raymond. Then he looked at the contract. Vanessa sat back down. Her composure was partially rebuilt, but it had the quality of something reassembled too quickly, the visible seams of a repair done under pressure. She looked at the table. Raymond picked up the red carpenter's pencil from behind his ear. He held it for a moment. He put it back. He looked at Ruth. Ruth looked at him. She slid the contract toward him, open to the equity partner's signature line, with the same unhurried precision she brought to every document she had ever placed in front of him. He signed it. He signed it with the pen from his jacket pocket. A plain black ballpoint he had carried every workday for 3 years because it signed cleanly and didn't run. He placed the pen against the line and wrote his name with the even, deliberate strokes of a man who signed documents the way he built foundations. Carefully, permanently, entirely without doubt about what he was putting his name on. Raymond Cole. Equity partner. He capped the pen. He placed it on the table beside the contract. He looked at Charles Alderton. "The project is sound," he said. "The documentation is complete. I'm ready to proceed whenever you are." Charles Alderton looked at him for a moment, then at the signature, then at Vanessa briefly, with the specific expression of a principal who has just recalibrated the geometry of the room he is sitting in. "Let's proceed," Charles Alderton said. Ruth found Raymond in the lobby 20 minutes later, while the Alderton attorneys finished their review upstairs. She stood beside him near the east entrance, where the February light was coming in flat and cold through the glass. She said nothing for a moment. She was looking at the building across the street. "You didn't tell her," she said. "No," Raymond said. "You could have. I know." She was quiet. "Then, how long have you known she was the PM?" "2 weeks," he said, "since you called." Ruth looked at him. "And you didn't say anything to her?" "In 2 weeks. The contract was going to say it," Raymond said. "The contract says everything correctly." Ruth was quiet for another moment. She reached into her portfolio and produced a single sheet of paper, a notation she had made before the meeting, the Meridian Development Group Equity Summary, his name on it in the ownership column, dated 3 years prior. She had brought it as a backup exhibit, in case the signature line wasn't sufficient. It had not been needed. She folded it once and placed it back in the portfolio. "The assault," she said. "What do you want to do?" Raymond thought about it. He had already thought about it during the 20 minutes upstairs with the particular sequence he applied to any situation that required a decision. He had thought about the room, the witnesses, Davis standing without deciding to, Charles Alderton's hand on the table, the sound in a quiet space. "Document it," he said. "What we do with the documentation is a decision for another time." Ruth nodded. "She's going to lose the PM contract," she said. It was not a question. "That's Charles Alderton's decision," Raymond said. Ruth looked at him once more. The particular look she had given him at 9:15 p.m. 3 years ago, after the equity instruments were finished, after the midnight coffee, after the documentation said exactly what it was supposed to say. The look of a woman who understood what correct work looked like and was watching it stand up under conditions that would have collapsed incorrect work immediately. She put on her reading glasses. She turned toward the elevator. "I'll have the executed copy to you by end of day," she said. He said, "Thank you, Ruth." She was already in the elevator. It did not happen all at once. The Alderton Group terminated Vanessa's project management contract 11 days after the signing. Charles Alderton's office sent a formal notice citing professional conduct concerns identified at the execution meeting. The notice did not use the word assault. It did not need to. There had been 9 people in the room. She retained a new project management engagement 4 months later. Smaller scale, different corridor. A client who had not been in the room and had not, apparently, spoken to anyone who had. Raymond heard this through Ruth, who heard it through the network that documents travel in, and he said nothing in response except that he hoped the project went well. He meant it without effort. The permit violations were a separate matter. Ruth had flagged them in the 3rd month. 11 permits pulled under Raymond's contractor license number across a 22-month period, 3 of which had been cited for code deficiencies that remained on the license record. His attorney, a woman named Simone who ran a clean surgical practice in construction law, had filed the correction petitions with the licensing board. The board had opened an inquiry into the unauthorized use. That process moved at its own pace, through its own system, and Raymond monitored it without urgency and did not discuss it publicly. Raymond Cole's name appeared, for the first time, in a trade publication in June, a profile of the Meridian Development Group's East Corridor project, which named the equity partners and described the Alderton contract as the group's most significant engagement to date. The profile ran a photograph of the Callaway Street renovation alongside it. He had not seen the photograph in print before. He looked at it for a moment and set the magazine on the windowsill. He had 14 employees. He had a 15th starting in September. Ruth called early and regularly. Simone called when something required a decision, which was how he preferred his attorneys to call. The Alderton project was proceeding on schedule, which was the only schedule Raymond ran. Davis, the young associate who had stood without deciding to, in the room on the 8th floor, sent Raymond an email in May asking if he ever took on junior project consultants for construction side coordination. Raymond called him that afternoon. Davis started the following Monday. He answered every call the same day. He was on a site or at his desk by 6:30. He kept the red carpenter's pencil behind his ear. He wore the Timberland PROs because they still had work left in them. On a fall morning 15 months after the Thursday in February, Raymond Cole stood on the top floor of the 2nd Alderton building, framing complete, windows in, the particular smell of fresh drywall compound and cut wood that meant a structure was entering its final sequence. He could see the East Corridor below him, the city running through its morning without announcement, the particular light of October that made everything look like a problem that had been solved. He had a cup of coffee in one hand and the red carpenter's pencil in the other. Not using it, just holding it. The way you hold a tool when you're not working but haven't set it down yet because you're not done. He thought about a conference room on the 8th floor and a contract open to a signature line and a name typed in a field that had been typed there 3 years before anyone in that room knew it would matter. He thought about Ruth at 9:15 p.m., with coffee going cold between them and documents that said exactly what they meant. He thought about what it costs to build something correctly, not the money, not the hours, but the specific patience of a man who knows the foundation is right and will wait as long as it takes for the walls to go up. He had not needed to prove anything in that room. The documentation had not been prepared for that room. It had been prepared because correct documentation was the only kind he produced, and correct documentation, by its nature, was available in every room that needed it. He looked at the pencil in his hand. He put it behind his ear. He turned toward the framing, toward the open stud bays and the runs of conduit, and the particular ordered geometry of a structure being built the right way, from the foundation up, by people who showed up 11 minutes before the job started and stayed until the work was done. Davis was 2 floors below, running the coordination walkthrough. Raymond could hear him asking the right questions in the precise cadence of someone learning how to read a building from the inside. He went down to show him what to look for. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.